Hello, and welcome to the show. Thanks for being here. This is my live show on every Thursday. You've probably been here before. If you're watching this live, you have to, schedule your day around it. So I totally appreciate you being here. The chat is always a great spot for us to ask questions of our guests, of which we have a great one today that we're going to get into. But first, let me thank all you patrons. Any of you that are supporting the show through essentially buying me a coffee every month. Let's just check that out real quick. Everyone probably has seen this spiel before, but I have a Patreon page, patreon.com/Bret Fisher. This is basically kind of like a mini newsletter. Every week it just essentially talks about what we're doing, what we've launched, what we're creating. I say we because I now have a team of 8 people kind of helping me with a bunch of this stuff. Just to get the word out, helping with new content. Hey, Ivor. So we've got an exciting team we've been building over the last 3 or 4 months, and we're doing some cool things this year. So stay tuned. But the way you can find out about that is just click the follow button. That doesn't require anything payment-wise. And if you still wish to get extra benefits for a couple of bucks a month, you can click one of the membership packages, including our show that we do every month. It's not really a show. It's more of a hangout. Every month, the High Fivers Club, we get on Discord and just sort of have a lunch and, I wouldn't say a lunch and learn, although we certainly learn stuff from each other and we get into some really good conversations on DevOps, but it's a casual meetup, right? Of people that, the few dollars a month that you pay for it kind of filters out anything bad from the internet, and all of us that are genuinely doing DevOps or are actively learning it can hang out and ask each other questions. We talk about projects we're working on. So that's the High Fivers Club, and you can join that for $5 a month. All right. So other than that, you know that this turns into a podcast, so you can just go to bretfisher.com for that as well. And that podcast is delayed a few weeks or a month or so behind the real world shows, but we edit that down for your listening pleasure on the go. If you don't have a chance to watch the full demos that we're doing in this show, including today, you can do all that. You can listen to all that rather on the podcast. So thanks for that. All right. Well, let's get to it. I've got Neil on the show. Neil Cresswell, technically of New Zealand, but currently in the States doing some cool stuff. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Awesome to be here, actually.
Yeah. And we were catching up before the show because both of us met back in the day at DockerCon. We're not sure if it's 2017, 2018, somewhere around those years. We were both volunteering for workshops, basically teaching people Docker in the early days, or kind of early days, because I think that was like year 4 or 5 at that point.
It was still very unstable, so it was early days.
Yeah. We spent a lot of time helping people get through the hurdles of getting it installed and deployed and using it every day. And even back then, you were working on this Portainer. You had Portainer, and we were all using it. So one of the things that I wanted to get into really up front was like your personal journey with creating Portainer, and for those that don't actually have never heard of this tool, it's one of the oldest tool in the Docker ecosystems for like managing Docker, web GUI. It's got a whole bunch of stuff in it now, and we're going to get into all that. But what I think a lot of people don't realize is how you're like one of those OG tools from way back in the day that was riffing on the idea of what if we didn't have to do Docker command lines for every single thing we wanted to do, right?
Yeah, I mean, command lines are amazing and people love them. But if you don't know the commands, how do you find out what it can do? So, my whole premise was, well, let's make it really obvious, the power of Docker, what Docker can do, and all of the cool stuff that Docker has available, make it front and center. Because if you didn't know that you could do Mac VLAN, you'd never know. If you didn't know that you could do persistence, you wouldn't know the command to go look for. And short of going and trying learning all those commands and seeing what they do, Portainer made it really easy to see what was available right in front of your eyes.
Yeah, and that's what one of the things I always appreciated about it was, one, it's the simplicity. You spin it up as a container, and it helps you manage the environment you're in. It was also one of the earliest tools that I remember. Adding ability for managing multiple nodes with or without Swarm, having agents. Like there's all this hidden gem stuff that we're going to get into that really, I think, makes it a very simple tool to use. I've been using it off and on for I don't even know how long. Like super, I'm sure I learned it from some other Docker captain way back in the day. And we were, I know in the Dr. Captain's program, especially, you're a favorite. Like Portainer is one of our favorite tools to recommend, especially for people that don't need extreme sophistication or overcomplication. They just really want a simple tool that works, but has all the necessary things that they need to do their day-to-day job. So congrats on still being here, because there's been a lot of changes in the community, right? We've had lots of tools, lots of ideas, and you prevailed. So congrats to that.
Yeah, that's my stubbornness, determination, and just I'm going to make this thing work attitude there. That's I so strongly believe in the whole message behind Portainer, why we created Portainer, and I'm just absolutely adamant that for this technology, which is an absolute game changer, containerization, for it to get into the mainstream, it has to be stupidly easy to use. You can't have a complicated technology adopted by the mainstream, and there's absolutely no reason why every single business of any size shouldn't be able to embrace container-based applications and services. The only way to do that, not everyone can afford to hire expensive SREs and DevOps people. The only way is to make the tech stupidly simple, and that's
Right.
the whole ethos behind Portainer. Make it stupidly simple to use.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, one of the things that tools like Portainer do is make some of my training unnecessary, because one of the things I often train and teach people on is those hidden gems of the command line that you're bringing out in the UI. People see it visually, where often those things, even with the -- help commands that we always look at and talk to people about, like, unless you're someone who reads every one of those or reads the entire man page or whatever, you tend to not understand the benefits of some of the functionality that's hidden away, or you don't even understand why a command exists, because the help doesn't really give you the why, it just gives you the how. So it's something that I mentioned in my courses. It's mentioned, if any of you watching have not heard Portainer mentioned on this show, so it's usually the answer to some question every month for the last 3 years. It's just sort of one of those tools that at this point, it's almost like, how do you not know about Portainer? So I don't know why we haven't talked about this on the show, had you on the show, especially since we met back in the day. I remember you handed me a T-shirt, like right back when we were all getting plenty of swag. You were like, here, have what size T-shirt do you want? And nowadays, it's funny because I joke with everyone that no one gives us swag anymore because I got to mail it. And I don't, like, all my T-shirts are getting worn out. We're going to have to just go back to real world conferences just so we can get some updated swag, I think.
Well, I was at KubeCon in LA late last year, and it was just, there was swag everywhere, and I'm like, woohoo! I can restock all of my actual vendor T-shirts. So I just went and grabbed all these shirts and hats and everything, and restocked everything. Yeah, it was the same. They were all threadbare.
Yeah, and I mean, I almost went, but you're now in the States because the company is growing. You all are doing really successful. So let's talk about that for a minute before we get into the product. So first off, like, for everyone just curious about this thing, we are going to get much more into it, but what's the elevator pitch? It's a web app, right? Like, that's the main interface we use for it?
Yeah, so we use that tagline, service delivery platform, because we're so much more than a web UI now. It's so deep. It's a self-service portal for developers that is implemented by a platform engineer, a sysadmin, or a consultant. Choose what you like. So somebody who knows what they're doing installs Portainer in the environment and provides Portainer to other users inside that organization who may not necessarily have the same levels or depth of skill. So that's kind of its goal is to be installed by someone smart in an organization, to be used by the rest of the organization who doesn't need necessarily to have the same depth of knowledge in Docker or Kubernetes.
Right. And I'm going to learn a bunch of stuff today. So, like, for those on the chat, often it's great to have these guests on because I'm learning as well, and so they're just teaching me things. But Neil today we're gonna go through some of the functionality, and I'm a little outdated on all the latest updates because there's been a steady stream of updates for 5 years. I mean, how long has this tool been around?
Yeah, I think it's 5 years. It initially it was just three or four of us building it for basically 3 years, and then we decided, hey, this thing is actually probably got some legs on it. Let's try and turn it into a open source company. Got some venture funding, and we're able to hire a bunch of developers, and then once you have developers, you can change the world way faster.
Right.
So yeah, now we've got lots of developers working on this thing. In fact, we've got over 20 full-time devs building Portainer out now.
That's amazing.
About as many QAs as well to try and improve the quality of the product. So we've got this army of people now building functionality. So every second month we actually release a new version, and every single month we release probably 100 new features and capabilities or bug fixes. So it's evolving so quickly and is so feature rich now.
Yeah, and back when I first learned it, it was all open source, and is that now the community edition?
Yeah, correct. So we've got Portainer CE, which is the open source community edition version, and then we've got Portainer Business. And Portainer Business, its real point of difference is if you have a CISO, you'll need Portainer Business. So we've basically said there are compliance, governance, and additional levels of security that a organization requires. That is built into the business version. So if it's just you using Portainer or just your team using Portainer, the free version is probably okay, the open source version. If it's multiple teams or your entire organization, then Portainer Business is probably the answer. Just because we've got better, there's better logging, there's integration with corporate directory services, role-based access control, that kind of stuff.
Nice. Now, this is something. There's no SaaS component of this, is there? This is all something that I'm downloading and running in cluster. Yeah.
So you run one copy of Portainer somewhere, anywhere. So you can either spin up a single Docker host and run Portainer. You can put it in a cluster. You can put it in one of your production clusters. So you have a copy of Portainer running somewhere, and then you have our agents on every other environment that you want to manage. So we can support up to 20,000 clusters under one Portainer instance. So when you talk about multi-cluster management, that's pretty decent size. But you run it somewhere, it runs as a container, and our agent runs in every other environment, and the agent takes care of the secure comms between Portainer and the remote environment.
Yeah, and that I loved that model early on, back when I wouldn't shut up about Swarm, and I was hoping that Swarm would last forever as a simple alternative to Kubernetes. Of course, everyone that's listened to this show knows that it's the feature set building has kind of died off. It's still built into Docker, it's still there, but it's barely getting one new feature a year now, and who knows the future of it. So a lot of us have just kind of moved away from that. But there is still this huge, I feel like it's huge. It's maybe not huge in terms of the world, but there's definitely a strong community about Swarm. There's chatter going on about it in my DevOps, right above me, in the DevOps Discord room every day. I mean, people are asking questions. People are taking my Swarm course. So there are definitely still people out there using it, and it speaks to them. And I think you're one of the few tools that really gives an additional bunch of functionality on top of Docker and Swarm. Is that right?
Yeah, and believe it or not, so we've got some anonymous analytics that run if you let it. And that's how we know how many users we have. And we've actually just clicked over 600,000 regular monthly users of Portainer, which is pretty cool. But there's about 30,000 of those every month are actually Swarm users. So, it's actually quite consistent. I'm not seeing it drop off much. And it's quite interesting. Like we see the month-on-month growth, and Docker standalone is still growing. It's 8% month-on-month growth of new users, roughly. Of Docker users. So even Docker itself, Docker standalone, is still increasing in regards to its adoption. But yeah, Swarm, it's still vibrant. We still get feature requests to add capability into Portainer for Swarm. I'm slightly more concerned about its long-term viability now, but it's still an amazing product.
Yeah, and I keep hoping. I mean, you and I probably pay a lot closer attention than some people on the chat, but there, for the last year or two, I believe that there's been, actually no, since 2019, there's been work on extending the volume support for Kubernetes drivers, the
CSI.
CSI, thank you. I was almost saying CNI. I was like, nope, that's not the right one. The CSI standard, and that Kubernetes sort of set. And there's been some good effort there, but it hasn't made it into a Docker release because Docker doesn't do major releases, but every couple of years now, which is kind of crazy, but also just shows the maturity of the tool. There's bug fixes, but I think for something like this, it probably would have to be in a major release. I'm just guessing. So I wouldn't be surprised if CSI got added in and suddenly you could use the plethora of growing Kubernetes projects, or at least a few of them, because I do believe they have to add a tiny bit of custom functionality for each one of them. But regardless, the way I understand it is it could breathe, you never know, it could breathe new life into the project and people could use it again. It's one of the challenges I had because RexRay was my favorite storage engine for it, and that kind of fell to the wayside and got stopped being supported essentially by the company that was funding it. I think it was Dell or VMware, one of the two. We're both. And so there's a lot of people out there that I think would love there to be this viable other option. Strangely, we're going to have, not strangely, but ideally we're going to have Nomad on, I think, later this quarter, which is another well-mentioned orchestrator out there. Not quite as easy as Swarm because you still got to set up the database cluster console and all that stuff for managing it. But I'm always going to have a place in my heart for Swarm, no matter if it completely goes away or what.
Watch the space. We're actually adding support for Nomad in March, so there'll be a very first version of Portainer with support for Nomad in March, and it's actually a cut down version of Nomad, so it's very, very simple to install and configure. So
wow,
it's Nomad with using the Docker driver, but behind the scenes. But technically, you can use it for anything. But yeah, in March will be our very first 0.1 release with support for it. Because again, all we care about is from Portainer is deploying your applications that run as containers. The underlying mechanism for us is actually irrelevant. It doesn't matter if it's Docker, Swarm, Kubernetes. That's why we have ACI support too, to kind of prove a point. Not that anyone really uses it in production, but it's there. And adding Nomad as well.
And that would make you. I feel like you're the only tool that does Kubernetes and Docker in one tool. And now you're going to add Nomad, which would definitely make you a unique tool in the ecosystem, because I've never heard of a tool that does all three. Even Rancher 1, which I think someone in chat said, Code Coffee says, we are also planning to migrate to Swarm from Rancher 1.6, which I'm guessing that was the last release of the one branch back when they would support Swarm and had cattle and their own orchestrator at the time, before they basically went all in on Kubernetes and then only Kubernetes, which of course rubbed a lot of people the wrong way just because they were trying to not go Kubernetes. So, it's kind of amazing that you have all this functionality. And then I keep finding about all this other functionality elsewhere. Like, I just want to show this off, something that I shared this week that didn't realize the significance of it with Portainer, but I'm a big fan of Multipass. If you've listened to this show before, we actually just talked a lot about Multipass last week because we went through all these Docker desktop alternatives, and one of the boxes in that spreadsheet, of which I should have up if I was prepared, was a built-in GUI that would at least let you do some basic stuff with Docker, kind of like how Docker Desktop does image management, and it does composing and running container management now and stuff like that. But in Multipass, which is turning out to be the second or third best alternative to Docker Desktop, based on this silly little spreadsheet that we have. I'll pull it up in a minute. But the point I wanted to get to was they made it not only easier to auto-install Docker, but make an alias so that you don't even need Docker on your host machine. It just runs straight to this VM through this alias. And then they added Portainer in there out of the box, right? Is that true?
It's true.
Yeah. So now you essentially have this web GUI that's way more full-featured than Docker Desktop, at least in terms of the GUI, writing on top of a VM, which Docker Desktop runs in a VM, running an alias for the Docker command line, so you won't even need it on the host and have to worry about all the configuration of the context in order to get Docker to work correctly with the VM. And you can choose whether or not it's Docker or Kubernetes. You can do one or the other. You can do both. Rancher Desktop, if you weren't here last week, Rancher Desktop was kind of the focus of the show because they seem to be the one piling on all the new features really, really quickly. But Multipass has been around a while and has been my favorite way to set up multi-node swarms ever since Docker Machine went away. So it's really great to hear Portainer. And by the way, for you, those of you watching, as far as I know, Neil, let me know if I'm wrong. Portainer runs on every Docker engine. Like it runs on Docker Desktop. It can run on Rancher. It can run on all the things, right?
Absolutely. All we need is Docker API or Kubernetes API, and we'll run there. We don't care. ARM64, Linux, Windows, pretty much any active. I mean, we even know people using it on an IBM Z series mainframe, so it's completely feasible to run it anywhere you like.
Nice. Yeah, and that's kind of the nice part about it is it's universal. It can run on servers. It can run on your local machine. It's a very universal utility. So, Code Coffee's commenting, Nomad seems simple, but actually is very complex. Yeah. It does have that nice feature of being able to run things outside of containers. But once you've like fully gone container crazy like I have, that's not an interesting distinction anymore because it's like, why? I don't want to run stuff on the host anymore. So we're gonna start diving in. I'd love to start diving into some of the functionality and demos of this. For those of you in chat, if you've used Portainer, do you have any questions? You have feature requests, all that stuff. Like you got the founder and CEO right here, right? So let's take the opportunity to ask him any questions we have, and then hopefully, if we can get our demo set up correctly, we can share some and to talk about the product. Did you try sharing your screen? Was that working?
It's working. I can do it. We're going to get some inception here. Is it shares you, shares me, shares you? So
yeah, it's turtles all the way down, as they say. All right, let me see if there we go. Is there a way to zoom in on the interface so it's a little bigger, easier for the
Is that better?
Mobile users? Yeah, it's a little better. Is it any bigger? Can you do it? We're testing whether your theme is size friendly. All right, that's good. Yeah, perfect.
We'll go with that one because otherwise it looks like cartoon font. Right, so I've got 3 different instances of Portainer up here. I've got one on my local machine, and this is as if I was emulating myself as a developer. So this is actually my local machine is running Docker Desktop. And so from within the one instance of Portainer, I can access both the Docker side of Docker Desktop and the Kubernetes side of Docker Desktop, which is actually pretty nice. And by the way, with Docker Desktop native, you can't do that. You can't access both sides simultaneously. The
right.
UI that's built into Docker Desktop is only for Docker, not for Kubernetes. So
right.
Yeah, we've got both here. So that's to show that one, and I can go through some of the coolness that's in there. I've also got our business version, which I'll show you some of the features. And this, again, shows you we've got some Edge deployments, and we can talk about Edge, some Kubernetes, some Docker Swarm, and some standalone. So we've got a whole mix of stuff. And I've also got an instance running on Linode, which is a managed Kubernetes service. And so we can see that as well. So I can go through and show you a mix of all of them and the features of which.
And this is all with one instance, right? So it's technically multi-cluster?
So this one here, this Linode instance, this is an instance running on Linode. This one is an instance running on my machine. This is one instance managing multiple clusters.
Oh, I'm sorry. So okay, yeah, you're switching tabs. Yeah, okay, got it.
Switching tabs.
Yeah, got it.
Is it a bit laggy?
Yeah, it just doesn't show the top of the browser, so I didn't actually realize it was a tab switch. So no big deal.
Yeah, and so it's the local host one. Yeah, as a developer or as a home user or however you want to describe yourself running on your machine, it's quite nice to be able to come in here and from a Docker perspective see the containers that are running. Obviously see the network, see the volumes, so you can actually engage with the Docker environment directly, or you can instantaneously switch and actually start managing the Kubernetes one as well. So you can start to deploy Kubernetes applications. I can go and deploy something with Helm. You can kind of do anything you feel like. So it's really nice from within the one tool on my machine, being able to manage both sides of the camp there.
Right.
And one of the really, really important things here is that we've, our focus, and my product team, I think I drive them crazy. I'm really maniacal on making it simple to use. I hate lingo that doesn't really help explain what something is for. So we've always got two options. We've got this our form based mechanism, which is more like a wizard. It's guided. It helps you in plain English with some tech, obviously, but it guides you through doing something. So creating a namespace with a form. This is actually helping me do things. So do I want to do a resource quota? Yes or no? And what is it? And here, if you know resource quota in Kubernetes, it's not as nice as 0.1 of a CPU, 0.4 of a CPU. So we're actually doing a lot of translations to make it really easy to help you set quotas in a mechanism. So things like storage quotas and load balancer quotas, just because your class has labeled, maybe just maybe you don't want your devs being able to go crazy and deploying 57 applications with 57 load balancers, because that's going to get quite expensive. So maybe you want them just to be able to have 4 load balancers. Same thing with storage. And we make it really, really easy to give access to registries. So we'll actually go and auto create the image pool secret inside the namespace for the private registries. So we make it really, really easy to do things. Or if you know what you're doing, you can just paste in a manifest or from Git or paste something in. So, it really depends what you want. So that's kind of the main difference, I believe with us compared to other tools in the market. If you look at any other Kubernetes management tool sets, they all expect you to know Kubernetes. If you don't know Kubernetes, you're really drowned. They don't guide you through how to do something in normal everyday IT language.
Right. All right. The questions are pouring in. I'm going to interrupt you in the middle because that's how we do it here with the chat. Code Coffee asks, does the community version have multi-cluster support, or does the community version?
So the blue sidebar here, unless of course you're in dark mode, which most people like the dark mode, but yes, it does. Both versions support 20,000 clusters. So the blue version is community. So if you want something quick and easy, if the sidebar here is blue, I'm in the CE version. If it's gray, I'm in the business version. So, but yes, 20,000 nodes, or 20,000 clusters, I should say.
Nice. That's a nice round number. I'm not sure I see anything close to that, but it's good to know your max, I guess. Chandra is asking.
It isn't even a max, sorry. That we basically spun up 20,000 environments on Amazon, which was fun. And we were measuring the I/O load and other bits and pieces, and we could go higher than 20,000. I just didn't want to spend any more money spinning up any more nodes than 20,000 nodes.
Yeah, I think for almost everyone out there, it would be, unless you're Google or Netflix or something, it would be as many as you want, because
yeah, pretty much.
Once you're at 20,000 clusters, you've got all sorts of problems that aren't related to this. The Portainer said, Chandra's asking about, it's not really a question, but I'm going to put it in the form of a question. Resource monitoring dashboard. It's almost like a feature request, I guess, is what they're asking.
So I'm going to assume these questions are on Kube, but otherwise we might want to qualify that. So if to the audience out there, if you're asking a question, just be clear, is it Docker or Kube? So in here we have the ability for Kubernetes, so you can see how much memory is currently used, how much is reserved CPU. You can look at the stats, so we can go and see how of the node, how much memory is used, how much CPU is currently being used. So we can see this kind of information. So you can see it at a node level, you can see it at a cluster level, and at an application level. If I was to deploy one, you would be able to see it at that level as well. So if I was to come into, say, the Portainer agent and see stats, I can actually see for this particular pod, in this case, because it's Kubernetes, how much memory and CPU is the pod using. And this is simply pulling metrics from the Kubernetes metric service.
Right.
So, and for Docker, we do in fact, exactly the same thing. You can come into your containers and come into any container and see stats. Same thing. There's slightly more information with Docker, but basically the same principle.
Right. So, okay, so you're acting as the metric storage system then, right? Because you don't have like a,
We're not storing. So we are simply connecting to the metric. So what I can't do. So I'm showing you right now. What I can't show you is what it was 15 minutes ago. And so if I come into these stats here, I start collecting stats at this exact second. This is the time I started, and then you can sit and monitor it. So it's different from a Prometheus or Grafana, where I can say, show me the stats half an hour ago. It's not that. This is real monitoring right now to triage a problem, as opposed to responding to an SRE ticket that said at 9:30 this morning the system was running slow. Can you tell me why? Not through this, you can't.
Right.
This is basically right now there's a problem. I want to go triage what's going on right now.
Yeah, and I'd say that at least in my experience, that's pretty similar to all the other dashboards that aren't a full monitoring tool, is that they give you that kind of stuff as well. So this seems very in line. I wasn't really sure, because if it said, I was like, wow, if you're storing metrics, like how far does this go? Like this could just go down a rabbit hole.
We're not storing any metrics at all in our database. It would blow up our database.
Yeah.
There is currently a dev spike to look at an integration with Prometheus to allow us to provide more historical data. I'm still not sure on the value of that. So that's why it's a dev spike as opposed to anything else. But that's something we are considering. I've actually got this little chart of feature coverage. And you can see here, can you see that PowerPoint slide? I have shared my screen.
Yes, yeah, I can see it. So, you can zoom in a little bit if you want to make it easier for people to.
So this is basically a cloud native platform. Like it or not, believe it or not, you will, when you're deploying containers in production, need an answer to everything in this box. You'll need an answer. The green is what Portainer currently delivers today. But like it or not, there's no escaping the reality. You will absolutely need an answer. Now that's why the CNCF landscape is massive, because there is a product for each of these boxes. And you can go and build your own version of Portainer by putting best of breed products from the CNCF landscape in each of these boxes, if you so desire. But we're basically saying we will give you 80% of the value from all of these tools inside Portainer through here. So deep metrics and alerting, this is where Prometheus and Grafana shine, and we're not doing it there today, and we're considering, do we get in that space? And same with logging. You'll see we've got real-time logging, but we don't have anything kind of centralized to some syslog server.
Right.
So we're looking here and saying, where can we flesh out and add value? Because if we can't add value, it's not an area that I want us to go into. We must be able to make something easier to use or simpler to understand, or there's got to be some kind of unique value prop for us to add it to Portainer. We don't just add it for fun.
Right. And one of the things that's, because it's a container and it's not a dozen containers, at least not to get the web engine up, it tends to be a much easier deployment methodology. In fact, we were just talking before the show, you were telling me all the places you can do it, and I'm going to switch back to my screen real quick. There's a marketplace for DigitalOcean, one of my favorite easy hosters, and they have Portainer in there, and that just makes it even easier if you're on DigitalOcean, for example, and I think you mentioned some other ones, right? Civio?
Civo Cloud, yep.
Civo.
Yeah, and we're also with we're a charm on the Juju Charm store. So if you want to use Juju to deploy your clusters anywhere, you can use that, and also Micro K8's native as well.
Yeah, and so that makes it easier to deploy, and then if this might even be Inception, but is my memory correct in that you have like a list of common stacks or things to deploy or other tools inside the app that, am I remembering correctly?
Let me just minimize that one. We do for Docker. So under Docker, we have our app templates, and the app templates, this one is, because this is on my local machine, is redirecting out to an external self-hoster site. The app templates, you can just go and click to deploy. So this is very, very easy to get applications running in seconds. Now, believe it or not, there's actually a whole marketplace of app template JSON files. So we basically can redirect to any kind of JSON file. We have our own one, but you can redirect out to anybody can host one of these JSON files. And if I open it up, you'll see it's just a standard format. Anybody can create and host a template file, and then you bring it in. And if you search for Portainer template JSON, there's dozens and dozens of them out there on the internet that you can connect to and populate this list with a whole bunch of really cool stuff. Click to deploy.
Nice. Some other questions on that. I'm getting questions around comparing the functionality to Rancher. I know we talk a lot about Rancher on this show, and I actually never really thought about comparing the two. What are your thoughts on that?
So Rancher serves a really strong purpose, which is to build you a cluster on-prem. Right? Rancher has RKE. They have K3S. Rancher's primary function is to assemble you a Kubernetes cluster based on the components that they recommend. That's their primary goal. Portainer does not help you build a cluster. We help you with day two operations. So you hand us a cluster, install the agent, and then from that point on, to run and manage everything from Portainer. So in that regard, we don't care what kind of Kubernetes distro you're running. It can be on-prem, it can be Rancher, it can be K3S, it can be Microcat, it can be anything. We don't care. So if you try to say, well, is Portainer a replacement for Rancher? Well, it depends. Are you using Rancher to build you and maintain your on-premises cluster? Then no, it's not a replacement. Rancher, right, when you have it up and running, has a dashboard feature as well. But that dashboard assumes that you know Kubernetes. And it's talking about replica sets and stateful sets and PVCs and volume claims and all sorts of Kubernetes specific lingo. If you don't know what that means, you cannot do a thing. Right. There's also often just a plus sign for add an application, and it wants you to paste in a manifest. If you don't know how to write a YAML file, you can't do a thing. So in that regard, there's actually substantial value having Portainer running on top of Rancher, with Portainer being your day two operations tool for applications, but the Rancher being your tool to manage the underlying cluster. If you are in the cloud and you're using a DigitalOcean Kubernetes service, a Linode, a EKS, an AKS, a GKE, those managed Kubernetes cluster environments, then there is no need for Rancher whatsoever. Portainer is feature equivalent in day two operations. So, from within Portainer here, and if I take Linode as an example, I can actually come into the cluster and manage the cluster here. If I so desire, I can get a in-browser shell to that cluster and basically run get nodes. I can run this, and I'm talking to the cluster. We also have the ability to download the kubeconfig file. Now, this is actually talking to Portainer, not to the cluster. If I do this and open it, you'll see here the server is actually Portainer. It's not actually the Kubernetes cluster. And here's one I prepared earlier. If I do kubectl get nodes on my local machine, this is now going to talk to Portainer and give me back the nodes here. So we are a fully fledged kube compliant, kube API compliant proxy. So you talk to Portainer and proxy through. Same thing even with Lens. Here is Lens on my local machine. Here is that same Linode environment talking to Portainer, proxying through to the back end. Here's the nodes of the cluster, and you'd have no clue. So, in that regard, it's very, very similar to Rancher, and Rancher's value is really if you're spinning up and managing a cluster.
Right.
Did I explain that enough? Or
I think that's good, and so it made me realize like the difference. It sounds like to me that like the way I would phrase it, I guess, is there is no Portainer distribution of Kubernetes, right? So
There's not.
you're not a Kubernetes deployment solution. And like RKE would be that, or keys, K3S, like all these would be distributions of Kubernetes where you're completely agnostic. You set up the cluster somewhere else, and this is the management tool that goes on it, like you said, after day one, and then day two, that's you're using Portainer day to day to manage and deploy. And we're getting questions on GitOps, so that's definitely going to have to be our next topic, because I know the last couple of years we have just constantly talked about GitOps on this channel and GitOpsing everything in our lives. And why don't you set us up for like what? And when it relates to this, what is GitOps?
Well, yeah, first of all, before I go further, it's important to understand Portainer sits in between your users and the backend environment. So once you have Portainer running in your environment, you don't have to go and configure any kind of authentication or RBAC inside the cluster. That's all done by Portainer. So as I'm adding users into my local environment here, into Portainer, we are automatically creating shadow users in the backend Kubernetes. And then when I come to an environment and try and give access to somebody in a cluster, I'm setting a role. We are defining the RBAC in the backend Kubernetes cluster here. So you don't have to worry about it. So if let's say you had 10 kube clusters, you'd have to go and manually configure authentication and RBAC 10 times.
Right.
Well, with Portainer, you do it once in Portainer, and Portainer will do it to the backends automatically on your behalf. So it's really important to be aware that Portainer sits in between users and the backend system, and that's why it's important that we're a proxy, so that everything routes through us.
Nice. I don't think I quite understood how that you were actually doing the shadow creation and the RBAC management, and that's one of the reasons why the proxy is the advantage there. I know for most of us, putting any endpoint, especially a Kubernetes API, on the internet or anything close to the internet is nerve-wracking, and it requires basically a Kubernetes degree in order to feel comfortable enough that it's battle-hardened, everything's locked down properly, and it sounds like you're kind of solving that by being the protective front-end proxy for all that. Is that?
Yeah, I have a pet peeve for anyone who puts their Kubernetes API on the internet. My answer to that is, are you crazy or what? In fact, the NIST say do not do it under any circumstance. And so what we recommend is that you don't do that. The agent runs in the cluster. The agent talks to the Kubernetes API using the loopback addresses, and you therefore never have to expose your Kubernetes API to the internet. And in that case, then it's only Portainer to agent, which is a very, very secure comms channel. And you can even lock it down so only Portainer can talk to the agent, and then your users are authenticated securely by Portainer. And it's important inside Portainer, you can actually, when you turn on authentication, external authentication, you can actually go and have two-factor authentication. So if you're using any one of the providers, you can make sure you've got 2FA. So users can't even log into Portainer without their 2FA creds, and that's gives you this kind of battle hardened if you need it.
Nice. So all right, so we've got this proxy. It's managing users of multi-cluster. It's managing multiple clusters, managing Docker and Kubernetes, and soon Nomad. So the next step to me seems like, let's talk about application deployment, which gets me into the GitOps topic. I feel like, because nowadays there's still, I guess, the two camps, right? There's people that it's small enough, it's simple environments, so they'd rather just do something in a web UI, point it to a YAML or point it to some repo or something like that, and just say, auto deploy this thing without me having to be a GitOps expert and know, one or two or three other tools, right? And you were mentioning before the show that now that you're adding some of this functionality, you can even avoid those tools if you don't need them. And again, simplifying the pipeline of all these toolings, it can be quite daunting, I think, even for me, to set them all up in order to make sure that I just can deploy an app. I just want to deploy an app from some code that I have in a container image.
Well, so you'll always see in Portainer two buttons. This button, you could basically rename this to ClickOps. This button, GitOps, if you want it to be that simple. So I can click this button here, add application with a form, and we'll guide you through in relatively plain English. There's the Kubernetes lingo as to what we're doing. So I can create an app called Neil, and it can come from Nginx, and I can add persistent volumes. And by the way, this here is setting me all the PVCs that I need through the storage class. Do I want to have it as a stateful set or as a replica set? How many replicas do I want? Do I want auto scaling? Am I going to set any placement rules? Am I going to publish it? Yes, it's going to be by ingress. And I can go and do all of the stuff, click deploy, and it'll go and deploy. So we've got this ClickOps engine if you want, and you don't need to know a single line of YAML if you wanted to do that. But there are more and more people wanting to get into GitOps. So we have the option here to say create from manifest, and here we got this Git repo default. And here you simply connect Portainer to a Git repo and to a manifest path, or paths, plural, put your credentials, and it will go and deploy. So as an example here, I've got just a Git repo just with just two basic files. Now, this is simple. Don't mock me for that. I'm trying to make it easy. But we've got here a Git repo, Portainer demo, Nginx YAML, right? So if I come to my machine here and say, here's my repo, and to save typos, I'm just going to copy and paste it. So you got the repo in here. Our one is actually refsed's main is the actual rather than master, and it's nginx.yaml. So again, we've got Nginx YAML, which is, if I click this is basically deploying just one replica of Nginx. And if I come back, we've then got Nginx service, which is basically the service. So we're publishing it as a service here. So I add a second path, and it's Nginx service.yaml. We've got authentication. So here is my Git access token. I want to automatically poll for updates, and I want to poll every minute. So you can either say poll Git for changes, and we're looking at this here, that the actual commit identifier. Has there been a change? If there's a change, redeploy. You can actually have force redeploy, which says we don't really care if there's been a change or not, just force redeploy anyway. So some people want that
on every commit. Yeah.
So you can either poll, or you can have a webhook. So you can either say to Git any change, or you can have a webhook that says, whatever Git, tell me when there's a change, and then I'll go and look. So you can pull or push. It's up to you. So as long as you do this, and you hit deploy here, this will go and connect to Git and deploy the manifest. This will then go and deploy the application. So now it's live. You see before it was red, now it's green. So it's gone and deployed. It's deployed as node port. And if I click it here, you'll see it's the 3080 port that I published from back here, and it's deployed from Git repo. If I hit edit this application, we respect the fact that it's GitOps. If you hit try and edit it, we just take you back to the Git page and say, you can't make changes in Portainer, make changes in Git. So it's forever now linked to Git repo. So it's just sitting there. If I now come back and say, I actually want to change this from one replica to 2, something really simple like that, commit the changes. Within a minute, this will basically auto update and change to 2. So we'll just talk in the meantime. Now, the reason we built this ourselves is we looked at all of the other GitOps tools in the market, and they all run in cluster. And so if you've got multiple clusters, it's deployed and configured multiple times.
Right.
Here, this is Portainer is actually running as the arbitrator. So Portainer itself is ensuring that all of the deployments are active in all of the clusters. So you can have hundreds and hundreds of clusters out there, all with GitOps configured from Portainer in this very, very simple way. And it's just going to go and manage. There's nothing needed. And you go, it's already done it. So 2 of 2. So you don't need to do anything in the cluster. You just configure it. And this GitOps solution works on Docker as well. So if I was in a Docker environment, I have exactly the same thing. So if I switch to Docker and I go to stacks and add a stack, Git repo, same thing. But here it's a Docker Compose file, but it's exactly the same thing. So we will basically ensure that the stack or Compose is live and running and managed from Git centrally. So it's a really, really simple, and what more capability do you need to get started with GitOps than that. It's very, very simple. That did not require any high degree of competence to get this kind of GitOps syncing working.
Yeah, and I think on the Swarm and on the Swarm and Docker side, I feel like you're the only currently maintained tool that performs a GitOps like workflow, which a ton of people have asked me over the years about, well, I love the idea of GitOps, but I don't want to have to shift to Kubernetes to do it. And every other major tool on the market is only Kubernetes for GitOps. And so there's this desert of tooling for just simpler setups where you just need Docker or Swarm. Does it work do I have to have Swarm to use the compose file? Can I use it with no?
Yep.
Like Docker compose command line kind of thing?
Yep. And one of the other cool things we did here in the business edition, you can actually go into a cluster, in a cluster. If I go to the setup of the cluster, you can actually set a change window. And so outside of that change window, any GitOps automation is paused. And so basically when inside the change window, the Git polling will work. So you can actually say, I don't want GitOps changes being propagated during core business hours. I only want them after hours. And so you can set a change window that says between 7 p.m. and 6 a.m. is our change window, and any changes are propagated and made live. But during business hours, don't do it. So even if a dev pushes a change in Git, it'll simply queue, and then inside the change window, Portainer will catch up and run those things, which is quite a cool feature.
Yeah, that's a subtly that's like a kind of a feature that's not it's either not available or not obvious in other tooling too. Because I think one of the challenges too is a lot of times we'll all go to containers, we'll go crazy with Kubernetes and Swarm and all that stuff. But just because we did that doesn't mean we have a highly redundant app, right? Like a lot of people will put up, I see solutions in companies all the time where they'll have 3 web front ends or whatever, but their database is also in any container solution. But it's not redundant, right? So they really can't do deploys all day, any day, whenever, right? If they change the version of the database and it has to replace the image, they're going to be taking their system down. And
correct. And
we'd like to all think we're at I can roll. What was the famous DevOps talk from Flickr, I think it was, back in 2008 that said they did 50 deploys a day and it blew everybody's mind. That's what we all wish we could get to. But it takes a lot there's a subtle complexity, especially when it comes to rolling updates on apps to ensure zero downtime. So I would say even for a lot of my customers and the people that I talk to, they really need that window, right? They just do it by making sure humans don't accidentally do something. But if they do, it's kind of neat that there's this protection there. And the idea that it queues it up, I wouldn't even have thought of that. That's a pretty interesting way to solve that problem for people and reduce the risk, I guess, of GitOps. So that's answering Nicker's question, which was, does this replace Argo instance in a GitOps scenario? Yeah.
Yes, it does. It replaces Flux, replaces Argo. Obviously, those tools are substantially more feature rich than this one. And if you need those features, then you've got no choice but to use them. Our whole focus here is making GitOps really easy to use. I really like the whole principle behind GitOps. I love it. It's just far too complicated, and we're actually making it so much harder for an SRE and a DevOps person to be productive because they're actually not spending time helping their users, embrace containerization. As a DevOps guy or an SRE guy, you should be helping your users get their applications in and efficiently running. You shouldn't be spending time managing the tools for the platform. That's just overhead. So right. the tools should be invisible. They should just work. And the more complexity and the more features that these things have available, if you don't use them, it's just a waste.
Yeah, I know a lot of especially with Argo. I mean, Flux is the same way, but a lot of my customers end up with, before DevOps, they really had. It was a mystery how it got into production, right? It was hand holding and people clickety clackety on a shell or something. But now that we're telling them that everything needs to be infrastructure as code and GitOps, all the things, the new problem is, sure, it's in code, it's in a repo, but now we have 5 repos to manage. We have the Helm repo, we have the Argo repo, we have the code repo. There might even be a separate repo that's got something that's like an overlay, like a customized overlay on top of Helm sometimes. It gets to the point where to make a release of software, when you have to edit 4 or 5 different repos to do that, it inherently feels more complex than it was before, even though we get all this extra benefit and oversight, review, PR reviews, that whole PR process is a benefit, I think, of GitOps. And but I know to a lot of developers, it seems like they have a lot more work now because they can't just release in their code repo. They now have to do all these other things in other repos to get it deployed. So cool. I like that.
And there's a lot of other features. Man, I'm logged in as an admin user, so I can see a lot of stuff here. But we have this option here to show system resources. Now there are a bunch of resources that inside Kubernetes make Kubernetes work. If you mess with them, you will break it. As an admin user, you can break it. So we by default hide them. So all these system resources, so we hide them, and we actually make them read only. So you can't actually, even as an admin, I'm an admin user, I can't mess with these because messing with them is dangerous. Now, if I want to, I can come in, same thing with namespaces. I can go and unhide the system ones. If I want to, I can come into kube system, and I can unmark it. But then that's me knowingly removing Portainer's protections to then go and do something. So we are very, very cognizant of the fact that mistakes can happen, and we want to protect you from mistakes wherever possible. So you have the ability to turn off our protections to in case of emergency, but they're there by default to protect you. And it's the same thing with things like the cluster. You may, just because this is running inside a cloud provider with load balancers, maybe just maybe you don't want your users using them because it costs you money. If you've got multiple storage paths, storage classes, maybe just maybe you don't actually want to have all of them available. Maybe you don't want your Azure NVMe premium storage being made available in your dev cluster because it's expensive. So we've got a whole bunch of stuff. Like the default namespace, you should never deploy to the default namespace, never. So we've got an option to turn it off in the free version as well. Turn it off. So you can only deploy, users can only deploy to named namespaces, not default.
Right. Nice. I have a great list of questions. The chat has supplied us questions. Quinn is saying Portainer feature request for Docker, show container uptime on the container list dashboard.
Yeah, and here. Yeah, we've only got these ones right here. So yep, I get it. So we've got the created date, but we don't have uptime.
Right.
So yep.
Yeah, cool. It's like the diff between created and now. Does Portainer have the LDAP configuration file like JSON to mount? LDAP configuration.
Our authentication. So our LDAP authentication, you fill in the forms. By the way, something that it's not immediately obvious. Everything I'm doing here in the UI, we have a very rich API for. So Portainer is actually an API first product. So we actually have a Swagger file, and everything can be configured through API. So if you want, as an admin, want to infrastructure as code Portainer and all the initial settings, you can do so as well. So you can go set all this stuff up. So I'm not sure if that was meant, what they mean there, but LDAP, you either type it in manually or you use our API to configure the LDAP settings.
Right. And I'm interpreting the question from Code Coffee as can we GitOps this config? Does the config for LDAP, can it be something that we mount like a JSON file into there?
Not at the moment. Not at the moment. So that's basically an API call, and we are ourselves trying to get more GitOps. We actually have a persistent volume ourselves, and we're in discussions to say, do we even need that? Can we actually persist everything from Portainer in a Git repo? So you use the Git repo as our database of sorts. So there's some thoughts on that and how we could do that ourselves, but there's actually a desire for us for Portainer itself, the container, to become completely stateless, and we have a Git repo holding our state. So that or a database, an external database. So we're thinking that one through.
Yeah, that sounds awesome, but also sounds like it could be very tricky. I think that's the natural progression too for a lot of us, is that once we start to love the GitOps mindset of everything's infrastructure as code, the GUIs. The GUIs are either limited or prevented or whatever, and that I go through the PR process for changes to anything in the cluster, that's when you inherently want the GitOps tool to be deployed through GitOps, which which starts to have a little nesting doll problem. But that is a challenge, I think, with any tool out there right now. And the one thing that I have always asked for, and it sounds like this might be a part of your idea, is that, GitOps or any infrastructure as code doesn't really handle, like, it's usually a third-party thing for the tool it's managing. For example, like Terraform's managing AWS. AWS doesn't stop working in the web GUI just because I want to manage it with Terraform only, right? I have to basically remove people's access or set them read-only. But every once in a while, they need that escape hatch, the emergency, to be able to go in and just change something on the fly because something's totally broken. So the challenge there is always, I wish the tools themselves, when I change them in the tool, that they would know that I want GitOps and that they would go change my YAML for me. And it never works that way, right? Because, of course, AWS isn't interested in using Flux or Argo or whatever right on the back end. But in your case, if this idea of yours was to store the config in a GitOps way, that to me means that I could still let people have permissions to the GUI to go change things, but in the background, it's recording changes, which I think is one of the core principles of, like, the importance of DevOps, or GitOps rather, is that I can use that same PR workflow for infrastructure change of all things, including things that have a GUI, right? So if you did that, you would, I would give you much love.
So the only complexity there is inside a manifest, there are thousands of options.
Yeah.
Yeah, inside the manifest. Inside the form, I can't have thousands. It would blow up. So if you were writing the YAML in our front end UI and we were saving in Git, as long as someone didn't modify it inside of the UI and add more things that the UI didn't cope with, because then if you then tried to edit it in the UI, there'd be a whole bunch of meta that we were unable to render into the UI and therefore edit. Yeah. So that would be problematic. So we'd have to try and get handle that clash somehow.
Yeah, and that's why this isn't something that I see often or at all, right? Because it's a complex problem of allowing something to be configured from multiple ways and then it all merge into one single source of truth. And that's what a lot of us always try to get to, is that single source of truth for what happened, what changed. And obviously, Git was never designed for this kind of stuff. We're kind of all just shoving this generic versioning tool into this. I even see now where GitHub themselves are actually trying to continually abstract away the Git protocol and hide it behind a friendly GUI so that I don't have to even know Git commands to do a lot of Git things. And I feel like, we're all kind of experimenting with this idea of what if everything was code and what if everything was in a GitOps type of repo. So I totally get it. It's hard, and it's going to be years before we get there, right?
Well, what's really interesting is our new sales guy, who has a very technical background. He said to me, Portainer is to kubectl what GitHub is to Git. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool for a sales guy to have that kind of clarity.
Right.
GitHub actually made Git very usable. Git from the command line is woo, but GitHub is and GitLab very, very easy. They made it very easy to use Git, and Portainer has done the same thing for kubectl and Helm.
Yeah, and I still. Today, there are things that I do in a GUI with Git that I don't actually know the exact command to do that at the command line. Like very complicated stash, merge, pulls all in one kind of things. Like you click a button and it does all the 3 or 4 commands at the same time. It's kind of like Docker Compose does for Docker. Like it's just it hides the complexity and I don't have to know it. It bugs me that I don't know it, but at some point you just have to be okay with that level of abstraction. All right.
So one of the things with Portainer we struggle with is the depth of our capability. I could talk for days around things like just coming into a Docker node. We've got the ability to apply taints. You can apply labels here. You can do all sorts of stuff. So if anyone out there is playing with Portainer and Kubernetes, give it a really good play. There's far more capability than you can possibly imagine. all throughout the thing. Being able to go into an application, looking at the placements. Okay, yep. There's no constraints. It can actually run on this node. There's stuff everywhere. There's features and capabilities everywhere. I'm only scratching the surface right now. There's so much capability inside Portainer for Kubernetes. It's so deep.
Your
Like
UX,
even
people
something
are
as simple as this. No, the kube config file. If I had 10 kube clusters in here, when I hit this button, it's going to create me a single kube config file with them all correctly merged and formatted in one. That's
wow.
cool.
That is very cool. Yeah, that's always the challenge I have with any other tool out there. Once I build the cluster, is it's not going to merge with my existing kube config. So I either have to use a separate file and just deal with that extended command line option, or I have to manually copy paste myself. There's probably a tool, there's probably some manual tool out there that auto merges or something, or helps me merge it. But just having this out of the box, that is a neat little button. All right, more questions. Can you upgrade a community install to a business version, or is it a full redeploy?
That's the difference between open source and closed source. You have to redeploy. So it's a new container. So right now, this one is running the. Oops, can't even type my own company. Portainer. So this is running Portainer CE image. So this is running this image. All you have to do is basically stop and redeploy with the Portainer BE image. So sorry, Portainer EE image, and the database is 100% the same. So you simply stop the current one and then restart it using a different image, and it comes live. So, but all of your settings, everything is retained. The database is exactly the same. It's retained, but because of open source code versus closed source code, the open source community would have kittens if I had a mechanism in there to upgrade it to Portainer Business. So we've kept the open source clean, clear open source, and you have to switch to a different image if you want to switch to the Business Edition.
Paul is just saying, I'm sure it'll be mentioned, but the Business EE version is free for 5 nodes, which is how I have it.
Correct. So there is a 5-node free license, so you can basically spin it up for 5 nodes, and if you want more than that, then you license it. But for home users or people just starting out in a lab environment, 5 nodes is plenty.
Yeah. Is there Archimedes is kind of asking the same question I think we just asked, but can you configure the configuration for authentication from the environment variables or command line? Because without that, there's manual effort that needs to be documented rather than coded.
So same thing. All of Portainer settings right now are either configured in the UI or via the API.
Right.
So you can simply post API commands to Portainer to actually configure everything.
And there's not a Portainer CLI, right?
Believe it or not, one is currently in development. It kind of, to me, does my head in, because we're trying to take away the CLI.
Right.
But yes, we are currently writing a Portainer CLI just because there is so much request for it. So yeah, I don't understand. We're supposed to be taking away the CLI, yet we're giving back a Portainer CLI. But anyway, yes, there is one. There's one in development right now.
Well, you say that. There's another tool that I've mentioned several times this year called Replicated, and they have their own Kubernetes distribution. They called curl, and then they have this packager for applications on top called COTS, and it has a web UI. And one wouldn't think that you needed a CLI because their whole point is it's just YAML and web interface. But it does help for that GitOps, GitHub Actions kind of thing, especially for like linting or anything else that's related to their configuration or the configuration of the stuff in there. They do have that. It's a limited but a viable CLI that does a few of those things that I just need to automate. So I see how that could make sense, where you don't want, for things that you would normally go in the web UI, if you want to automate that for test deployments or test setups of things or whatever, I could see that makes sense. Yeah. Hopefully that answers Archimedes' question.
The other interesting thing is we're currently just doing research when so an environment. I'd love to call this add cluster, but then that would alienate Docker standalone. So we've called it add environment. Environment simply means a Docker node, a Swarm cluster, a Kubernetes cluster, right? So add environment here. We're actually just having a experiment to create a new cluster. So again, when I said we're not going to be a Kubernetes distro, we will never be a Kubernetes distro. But asking a cloud provider to create me a cluster is a very simple API call. So we are right now building a feature where you can say, I don't have an existing cluster. I want to add a new one. We will go and ask certain cloud providers. We're starting with Civo, Linode, and DigitalOcean. Hey, Civo, here are my credentials. Can you give me a cluster of this configuration? And we do that through Civo's API. They will then reply back with, yes, here is your details. We will then connect, install the agent, and add it to Portainer automatically. So for cloud providers, we'll be doing that, and we'll start with those 3 challenger brands, and then we'll look to add support for the big 3 later on.
Yeah, the harder ones.
Well, I've actually got a personal warm spot on my heart for challenger brands. So I guess I think we're a challenger brand, so I quite like helping the Civos and Linodes and Dios to sort of step up.
Yeah, I think I helped with Linode when they launched their Kubernetes offering for creating clusters with a few clicks. I think I did that live show for them, and that was like 2020, I think. Yeah, it was right in the beginning of the pandemic, and nobody knew how to do live shows, so I was helping them out with their live show, and that was really cool. And I love seeing that because for years, I mean, from 2017 through like 2019 into 2020, I was not a huge fan for 1 or 2 person DevOps teams to deploy Kubernetes at all unless they were using a cloud managed solution, just because there was just all the tools weren't there yet. The install tools would sometimes have vulnerable configurations out of the box, and there was just no easy. You had to be basically an expert just to build the servers, right? Just to deploy everything. And now, obviously, a lot of the tooling has gotten simpler. Everything's getting better. But now we have these click button installs, and that's always my preferred recommendation for everyone. So if you're watching and you're wanting to build Kubernetes, that's how you should be doing it, right? Unless you're a Fortune 100 company, you may never need to build by hand. And by hand, I mean like a kubeadmin install, because even that requires you got to pick your runtime. You got to know which one that is and keep that one up to date. So there's a lot going on there that I just love that the clouds take care of, because I think that's the way that we're all going to eventually consume Kubernetes. Is it someone else made it and manages it and updates it.
If you want me to blow your mind one last time, we have this other feature, Edge Compute. Now, there's actually a feature you turn off or on here in the settings for Portainer, and it's this Edge Compute thing. Now, using Docker and Kubernetes at the edge is actually pretty neat. And at the edge, I mean connected to the internet. So you can have a cluster in a remote location. If you think about a mining facility, you've got Docker hosts out there at the mine site, or oil rigs. You think of all these use cases, smart cities, where you've got servers out there in the wild, and you want to centrally manage them from one place. That's our Edge Compute feature. So you can actually go and create edge groups, and you can create groups of nodes, and these nodes are using our edge agent, and I'll describe that in a second. Once you've actually created an edge group, you can go and deploy a stack, and that's either Kubernetes or Docker, depending on your nodes. Paste in a compose file or a manifest, or Git. You got GitOps as well at the edge here. And it will go and deploy that application on all of those clusters out there, all 20,000 of them simultaneously, if you so desired. That is a very, very cool feature. We're just about to release on the 7th a collab with Intel, where we'll also be providing zero-touch device onboarding and remote KVM, so the ability to connect to the remote device's BMC or KVM port and get a mouse keyboard, power it on, power it off, outside of Docker, which is pretty cool. So we've got this edge compute capability, and this is all powered by our edge agent. And the edge agent is, for lack of a better description, pub sub. The edge agent out there is talking back to Portainer, much like GitOps. Is there anything for me to do? Anything for me to do? Anything for me to do? Like, for example, here is my laptop. So this instance of Portainer here is running out there on the internet. Here is my laptop in our office. I have no port forwarding. I don't know if I want to click on it because I might use my bandwidth up and kill this stream, but I can actually click on this instance, and I'll be managing my laptop interactively. I'll do this other one. I'll be managing this device interactively, even though I have no direct inbound access to it. So you can have these edge devices in your home behind NAT. You can have a Portainer instance hosted in the internet, and you can manage them without any holes in the firewall. You can have it connected to a 4G modem, and you can manage it interactively over the internet securely, which is a very, very cool thing, either separately or en masse.
Wow. That I'm not sure, because when you would say edge computing, I'm thinking, how is that different than just a tiny cluster? But the idea that it's basically, is it like pools or where you can group them together? I mean, how does it know? Is it simply just deploying the thing you change to all of them?
Correct. So edge compute is basically just a tiny cluster. So it'll be a 3-node cluster out there in the corner of a street in a comms cabinet somewhere in the middle of Asia or Africa or wherever else you've got. So you've got these things distributed around the world, these clusters, and you want to manage them centrally and deploy an application to them right now everywhere. So you can say, here is my traffic light management software. Deploy this to all of my traffic light management systems all in the city right now, and we'll go and push it out to all of the clusters that runs the software that runs the traffic lights for that city. So you can do it in that particular type of use case. So it's just a very, very neat tool. You know, there's a whole podcast just on edge compute, but it's a very, very cool feature for people to play with.
So you mentioned podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a Portainer podcast?
We do webinars. We do regular webinars. We have our Portainer series, which you can come and listen to our Portainer series, and we teach you cool stuff about Portainer on a regular basis. So all of the old Portainers are up on our YouTube channel, but we schedule Portainer sessions all the time, and they're a deep dive on a particular piece of functionality inside Portainer.
All right. Okay, so YouTube channel. I guess there's a sign up on the website maybe for
you need to join our community, so you can go to the website and join the community, and then we'll send you a newsletter when we're going to run a Portainer event, and you can then register for the event, turn up, and it's a full interactive discussion and ask questions, and we show you how to do cool stuff in Portainer.
Nice. All right, so we've already got oops, I keep pushing the wrong button there. So you've already given some hints at stuff that's coming up. We got the CLI coming up, possibly. We've got Nomad support. Anything else you can tease us with?
We're further refining the GitOps solution. There's a whole bunch of really cool stuff coming up. Actually, we are looking at a more lightweight agent. We are adding support for better monitoring, so the Prometheus and Grafana type integration. How we can look into that. Again, I'm not sure if I'm going to do that, but GitOps is where we're going to be getting a lot more of our focus in the lines of how do we provide a slightly more capability, but without giving away our simplicity, because I'm really right. Focused on that.
Yeah, that's the hardest part, is to take a complex idea and make it simple but flexible. And Docker was one of the first tools I saw that kind of mastered that art out of day one, and that's because they had a lot of people that were focused on that. It wasn't by accident; it was because of effort. So I appreciate tools that take that extra level of effort to try to really understand the use cases like Portainer does. So thanks for that.
Yeah, you have no idea how hard it is to make something easy. It's insane.
It can be simple but not easy. Okay, so you said monthly updates and people can join the community. Is that a newsletter?
It is a newsletter, yes.
All right. And if people have more questions or want to reach out, they can do. You have Twitter. How else
We
can
have
they reach
Twitter.
out?
We have our Slack channel. And again, the invites are all on the website. So there's a Slack channel, there's a Discord, or my emails are always open. You'll be surprised. I respond to every single email I get. And it's just neil@portainer.io. So it's the easiest email to remember.
And of course, you're on all the socials. You have a Slack, you have a Discord,
We have a Reddit.
Reddit. Yeah. And there, my experience with the community is that they all just, they just enjoy using a tool that's easy to use, doesn't require a lot of maintenance, just works and supports whatever they're wanting to do, whether that's Docker single machine or multiple Docker machines or a swarm or a Kubernetes cluster. And I like that you've created this idea that you can actually have just one management tool for all those things, where so many of the other tools tend to focus. You've gone to the extra effort and to include all those things, and I really appreciate that, because a lot of people have that they have to switch complete tools just for different clusters, and
correct.
None of us have just one cluster anymore. Like if you're going to make clusters, you're going to end up with multiple clusters.
Well, the other thing is you'll find that devs are running Docker on their machine, but Kubernetes in production, and so they would really appreciate a single tool that lets them see both. Like I run Docker and Kube on my laptop, and it uses about 6 gig of RAM just to idle. So I have to go and spend money to buy a bigger machine to idle Kubernetes, so I can dev on both. It's crazy. So Docker uses about 100 meg of RAM. So I would much rather have my devs using Docker and having cheaper machines than anything else.
Yeah. Well, Neil, thank you so much for being on the show. I have learned all these new features are like, I feel like you said, we could go down for many more hours down the rabbit hole of all the features and functionality and the workflows. But I hope some of you listening will check it out. Again, it's been something I've been recommending particularly for Docker and Swarm for a long time now. And I'm glad that you're growing. And I think you told me some impressive numbers before the show. And congratulations on your success. I think the front page says something about 500,000 users or something like that. And it's just amazing to see the growth and the support that the community has given you.
Yeah, there's been just over 2.5 million people have used Portainer in our life so far, and we are now at 600,000 regular monthly users, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, very happy.
It's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. I grew up in a small town. That's a lot of people. Well, again, thanks you so much for being on the show. Good luck getting back to New Zealand, and congrats on creating this product and going for basically being the default tool for everybody as a web UI. I think is really where you're heading, and that's a pretty amazing thing to do in the vast world of Kubernetes and Docker and Swarm and Nomad and all these different things. So I'm looking forward to having you back on the show, so we could talk about the new features you're adding this year. It sounds like you're doing that pretty consistently. So again, if you have any questions for Neil, he's on all the things. He's on all the channels. Just go to portainer.io to check him out and get started with your web interface. All right, so next week we've got, who's next week? Oh, Gareth Rushgrove from Sneak, who used to be at Docker, is going to be on the show. We're going to talk about what he's working with. We're obviously going to talk about Sneak and their security tooling. Everyone loves Sneak that I know uses it. They love it. It's built into Docker now. You got a Docker scan command, and we're going to do that. So we'll see you live the same time next week. Come back and join us next Thursday, and we'll see you on the podcast.
Thanks again.